The Brazilian scientists who launched an experiment on the International Space Station. Luisa Qualo and Livia Luz work in the laboratory in San Diego. Article information. Author, Felipe Velisic. Role, from São Paulo to BBC News Brazil. December 7, 2023. Two Brazilian scientists have just sent an experiment into space that aims to lead to discoveries that can help combat serious worldly ills, such as autism and Alzheimer's, as well as face cosmic problems, such as the premature aging of astronauts' brains when they are out of Earth. They are cerebral organoids created in the laboratory, but with real human cells, explains biomedical Dr. Livia Luz, 30, from São Paulo, in an interview with BBC Brazil. We are going to test, over the course of 30 days, the effect of microgravity and what the possible consequences are for example, an astronaut who spends a lot of time out there, in space. Alongside her colleague and fellow countrywoman, Rio de Janeiro biologist Luisa Qualo, Livia operates the project. They sent 3 payloads, as the loads with research material are called in English, on a rocket launched by the American company SpaceX on November 9. Each of them contains thousands of these cerebral organoids, which have been popularly nicknamed mini-brains. Mini-brains are tiny recreations of neural networks that simulate the development of this organ in humans. After taking off with the rocket at the Kennedy Space Center, NASA's base, the American Space Agency, in Florida, they were delivered with almost 3 tons of materials to 2 astronauts who are on the International Space Station. Science still knows very little about the effects of microgravity on our bodies and minds, says Luisa Qualo, 24 years old. If NASA really wants to send the first manned trip to Mars soon, this needs to change. The American Space Agency has plans to send a spacecraft with astronauts to the neighboring planet in 2033. The initial idea is to orbit Mars and, on the way back, do the same with Venus, before returning to Earth. The proposal is to open the way for a space mission that will land on the Red Planet, scheduled for 2037. Elders in space. The pair of Brazilian scientists work for the Muotri Laboratory, at the University of California at San Diego, UCSD. The department is led by another Brazilian, neuroscientist Alison Muotri, 49, from São Paulo. Muotri's team has been sending experiments to the ISS since 2019. To cover the costs of the first of them, 4 years ago, the scientist even mortgaged his house to raise the money necessary to finance the venture. His involvement with space studies began 3 years earlier, in 2016. After reading NASA research on experiments carried out on the ISS, the Brazilian disagreed with part of the conclusions. For him, it was proven that our cells age faster in space. But NASA thought it was a temporary effect, while the Brazilian theorized that, in the brain, it would be permanent. The first time he alerted NASA to the problem, they didn't pay attention. After the promising results of the self-funded experiment, however, Muotri secured funding for others. In 2020, he sent another to the ISS and, the following year, 1 more. The work in which Livia and Luisa are now participating is the 4th in the laboratory that is sent into space, in partnership with NASA. They were materials with very genetic variability. The idea is to see how each individual can react to the microgravity environment and, who knows, discover more resistant organisms that can lead us to effective treatments for astronauts, says Alison Muotri to BBC Brazil. Experiments carried out so far have revealed that neuronal cells age faster in space. In 1 month, the equivalent of 10 years advance, according to the scientists. Upon returning to Earth, they regenerate a little, but not completely, the scientist-astronaut. Mini-brains are tiny recreations of neural networks that simulate the development of this organ in humans. An even more ambitious step is planned for Muotri in 2024. There are some procedures in space experiments that, although delicate, would be better done by human hands. The solution found, Muotri is training to be an astronaut. The invitation to go to space came at the end of 2022, in a meeting with 2 NASA astronauts. The initial idea was to train them to carry out work on the ISS, but then they realized that it would be easier and faster to prepare me to be an astronaut than to teach them the advanced techniques that we use, recalls the Brazilian. There they proposed that Muotri board a rocket to carry out neuroscientific experiments on the ISS, the space laboratory that orbits the Earth at an altitude of 400 kilometers. He agreed, and the flight is scheduled to take place by the end of 2024. He will be the first Brazilian scientist to embark into space. The two other countrymen who accomplished the feat were now Senator Marcos Pontes, a former Air Force pilot, in 2006, and engineer Victor Hispania, as a tourist, in 2022. It is planned that Livia Luz, one of the scientists who sent the mini-brains into space, will be trained with him, as his replacement on the mission should any eventuality arise. I'm also trying to get another seat on this rocket, maybe so she can go with me, comments Muotri. In addition to this first trip, others must be made later to continue with the work. My ambition is to transform laboratory members into astronauts. Luisa is second on the list, after Livia, he says, citing the name of another Brazilian involved in research with cerebral organoids. For now, the space mission, despite involving Brazilians, is primarily an initiative of the United States. We should probably have, in the end, multinational financing. There is interest from countries like Canada and South Korea, says the neuroscientist. He has been trying hard to get Brazil into the mix as well. In June, after conversations with representatives from the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation, he met with President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. According to the account, there was a promise that the country would join in some way. A few weeks ago, however, I received a call in which they told me that the budget for this project had been reduced. So, I can't say for sure whether Brazil will join, or how, says Muotri. Considered to also go on the mission, Livia Luz points out that she preferred to make the trip with the Brazilian flag on her uniform. If it is not possible, however, she will accept the adventure anyway, even if representing another country.